The vows were seconds from being spoken when the air cracked with tension. A trembling hand clutched the folded paper, knuckles white against satin ribbons. Grace whispered, "Not now, please," but her voice trembled as the crowd hushed. The officiant lifted the book, steady and calm, yet the pause lingered too long. A guest shifted, a cough echoed, and Grace's eyes darted to Daniel. He stood rigid, jaw set, fingers twitching near his pocket. The silence grew unbearable until the back doors slammed open. A vendor marched forward, voice sharp as glass, holding a sealed envelope high. "This was paid for," he announced. The crowd gasped as Grace's veil fluttered. Her father rose, face drained of color. A single breath seemed to hold the world, then the revelation snapped it. The person who objected was the one paying for the wedding. Grace's breath caught as the room tilted. She whispered, "Who would do this?" Daniel didn't answer, his eyes locked on the envelope now resting in Eric's hand. The officiant cleared his throat, steady but heavy. Guests shifted like dominoes, nervous energy rising in waves. Robert gripped the back of his chair, knuckles white, muttering, "This is not the time." Yet no one moved to stop Eric. He stood grounded, gaze fixed, as though sent with purpose. Grace felt her stomach twist. This was not chance. This was planned. Her mind raced. Contracts, payments, debts, what strings were being pulled. And above it all, the cruel echo of silence filled the air. Mark lowered the book slightly, his voice calm but edged. "We must proceed with care," he said. Grace turned to Daniel, eyes searching his face for reassurance, but found only a clenched jaw. Eric shifted his weight, expression unreadable, as the crowd leaned forward. Robert's voice broke the silence again. "Tell me this is a mistake." Grace whispered, "It isn't," though she wished it were. The room seemed to shrink. Every breath waited. In her heart, a sinking certainty settled. This was sabotage, and it carried a name. Daniel finally spoke, voice low but hard. "We knew someone would try this," he said. Grace's breath hitched, her hands clutching her gown. Guests exchanged whispers, the sound growing louder like rustling leaves. Mark straightened, eyes narrowing at Daniel's admission. Eric shifted, almost relieved the secret was acknowledged. Robert glared, anger igniting beneath his calm mask. The weight of Daniel's words pressed against the fragile order of the room. This was no accident. It had been waiting to break open. Grace's eyes burned as the truth edged closer to the surface. Eric lowered the envelope to Mark, his hand steady but reluctant. "You'll want to see this," he said. Mark hesitated, fingers brushing the seal, before pulling back. Grace's heart pounded, as if the paper itself pulsed with danger. Daniel's hand twitched toward it, but he stopped short. Robert stepped closer, his voice cutting sharp. "Open it, or this farce ends now." The crowd stilled, breaths shallow. Grace whispered, "Don't," but Mark's fingers broke the seal. The room exhaled as one, bracing for the truth that was about to detonate. Grace felt the weight of every eye pressing against her, and yet she forced her shoulders straight. Her voice faltered as she whispered, "I only wanted love, not this performance." Daniel's silence cut deeper than any blade. Robert stood rigid, jaw tight, his presence heavy with command. Mark held the envelope as though it were fire, unwilling to advance or retreat. Eric's eyes never left Grace, as though he silently demanded her to choose. Guests shifted, gossiping in whispers that pierced the silence. Grace's heart screamed for dignity, for vows untainted by strings and deals. She wanted Daniel to fight for them, but his mask remained. Her thoughts clawed at freedom, a marriage true, not staged. The smile she wore, sharp and brittle, was armor she had built since childhood. And now as she stood on display, that mask cracked at the edges. Mark broke the silence with a measured tone. "Do you wish to continue?" he asked. Grace's lips parted, but her father spoke over her, voice sharp. "This spectacle must end if it shames us." Grace felt her chest tighten, words trapped in her throat. Daniel finally glanced at her, but his eyes slid away before they met hers. She thought bitterly, he fears peace more than he fears losing me. Olivia leaned forward, whispering, she looks like she's suffocating. Eric shifted uneasily, torn between duty and conscience. Grace's mask cracked another inch. She wanted truth, not performance. She whispered inwardly, I will not break for them, though her voice never reached the air. Her father's grip on control only deepened, casting a shadow over her fragile dignity. Grace's breath grew shallow. Her mind flashed back to childhood dinners, where silence was demanded, smiles required. She had learned to shield herself behind perfect posture and flawless words. The smile they call demanding, she thought, is a shield I built at 14. Eric shifted the envelope toward Mark again, muttering, she deserves to know. Daniel clenched his jaw harder, resisting. Robert hissed, not now, authority dripping from every syllable. Olivia whispered to another guest, she looks trapped. Grace's chest burned with the desire to scream, but she held her ground. Dignity mattered more than display. The weight of her father's legacy and Daniel's silence pressed like chains, but her will forged steel inside her. This day would not consume her unless she allowed it. Daniel finally spoke, his tone quiet but firm. Grace, we can stop this if you want. Her heart twisted at his offer, late and hollow. She whispered back, I wanted you to stand before, not now. His face hardened, unable to meet her eyes. Mark's voice interjected, steady and unyielding. A vow without choice is no vow at all. The words cut deep into the silence. Robert's glare burned through the officiant, but he did not falter. Grace's hands clenched against her gown, knuckles pale. Olivia murmured to herself, she's fighting to breathe. The guests leaned forward, tension buzzing like wires ready to snap. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, summoning a strength she thought long buried. Her heart whispered, today dignity or nothing. Grace lifted her chin, voice steady for the first time. I want to finish this my way. Robert's mouth opened in protest, but she cut him with a glance sharp enough to silence him. Daniel's hand twitched toward hers but fell short. Mark nodded once, a subtle gesture of respect. Eric exhaled, shifting back slightly, relief flickering in his eyes. Olivia smiled faintly, whispering, finally, her voice. The hall fell silent, the crowd arrested by Grace's presence. She no longer looked like a bride cornered, but a woman stepping into her own. Her heart pounded, yet her resolve felt like stone. For the first time in years, her mask did not hide her, it revealed her. The risk was real, the stakes immense, but dignity had found its place in the light. The envelope lay unopened on Mark's hand, but whispers tore through the crowd like wildfire. Olivia muttered, this isn't just a wedding, it's a battle. Robert hissed, control it, or all is lost. Daniel's silence grew heavier, a shield he thought safer than truth. Grace stood, heart pounding, her mind replaying every contract signed, every favor owed. Eric shifted, his eyes betraying guilt, as though complicit in a larger game. Mark cleared his throat, but no one listened. The whispers swelled into accusations, fragments of secrets carried on nervous tongues. Grace whispered to herself, they are all playing with my vows. Her dignity trembled, but anger began to surface, sharp and alive. Every detail, the place cards, the deposits, the missing vendor, suddenly aligned into a puzzle too dangerous to ignore. Grace's gaze sharpened as she spotted the place cards scattered, some misspelled, others switched. They even rewrote my table, she thought, fury cutting through fear. Olivia's whisper reached her ear. That's no accident. Robert barked. Ignore it, eyes front. Eric looked down, shame burning as he muttered, I was told to switch them. Daniel snapped, by who? His voice finally cracked the air, drawing every eye. Grace stared at him, disbelief searing her chest. He had known pieces of this sabotage all along. Mark's voice cut sharp, speak clearly. This hall deserves the truth. Silence clamped down again, but the crack had spread. The sabotage was no longer rumor, it was fact unraveling in front of them. Grace's stomach twisted as she caught sight of the cake at the back of the hall. The intricate sugar flowers sagged, edges melting. Olivia whispered, "Sabotage, plain as day." Robert growled, "Not another word." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the cake, guilt flickering before he masked it again. Eric shifted uneasily, his voice low. That wasn't an accident either. Grace's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her dream had been unraveled piece by piece, contracts, vendors, even food. Mark's voice rang, steady. "Every vow is choice, every choice is power." The hall stilled, listening, caught between scandal and ceremony. Grace whispered, "Then let them choke on their games." Her mask cracked, and beneath it burned defiance. The officiant's eyes narrowed. Mark said, "If deceit taints this day, it must be named." Grace inhaled sharply, the words striking like steel. Daniel muttered, "It doesn't matter, we can finish this." She turned on him, voice trembling with fury. "It matters if my vows are built on lies." Guests gasped, some leaning forward, others recoiling. Robert's face burned crimson as he snarled, "This is family business, not public theater." Olivia whispered loudly enough to be heard, "She deserves more than a contract in disguise." Eric froze, caught between shame and fear. Grace stood taller, her rage giving her clarity. She whispered, "This isn't a wedding, it's a ransom." And the silence that followed proved she was right. Grace's heart raced as she saw a paper slip from Eric's vest pocket. He caught it too late, and Olivia's sharp eyes noticed first. "That's proof," she hissed. Robert growled, "Keep it hidden." Daniel's hand twitched as if to grab it, but he stopped. Mark stepped forward, voice heavy with finality. "This must be seen." Eric's face drained of color, lips parting to protest, but no words came. Grace's voice rose steady for the first time. "Show us, or this day ends here." The crowd buzzed, their hunger for truth rising like a tide. Every whisper, every misplaced card, every broken detail now pointed at a single fact. Someone had paid for the destruction of her vows. The discovery had clawed into the open, and no mask could hide it anymore. Eric's paper slipped free, landing squarely in Mark's palm before Robert could snatch it away. The officiant unfolded it carefully, his face tightening with every line he read. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like breaking waves. Grace whispered, "What is it?" her voice sharp, trembling. Mark's voice carried across the hall, heavy with judgment. "This is a receipt of payment for sabotage, dated yesterday." Gasps echoed, chairs creaked, whispers sharpened. Daniel's body stiffened, face draining to ash. Robert roared, "This is a forgery!" But Olivia shot to her feet, fingers stabbing the air. "That's his signature!" she cried, eyes locked on Daniel. Grace's gaze swung toward her groom, her breath choking. "Tell me it isn't yours," she whispered, voice cutting like glass. Daniel parted his lips, silence pouring out. His stillness was confession. In that instant, every vow, every promise fractured into betrayal. He was the one who fed chaos. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her, her voice cracking. "You paid to ruin me?" Daniel's reply was sharp, desperate. "I paid to stop the chaos before it swallowed us." His tone tried to cloak fear as reason, but it sounded hollow, selfish. Robert thundered, "Control, you've disgraced us all." Olivia stepped closer, trembling but firm. "She deserves truth, not contracts disguised as love." Mark's voice dropped low but firm. "Vows without freedom mean nothing." Eric shifted, guilt heavy, muttering, "He told me to hide it until after." Grace's chest rose and fell, fury scorching through heartbreak. She had built a dream brick by brick, and he had traded it for control. Guests leaned forward, voices buzzing like bees. Betrayal had not come from outside. It had been planted in her own house by the man who promised to love her. Grace's chest tightened as memories slashed through her mind. Dinners where silence was demanded, arguments where Daniel avoided her father's wrath, contracts signed in secret. All of it circled back to this betrayal. She whispered, trembling but fierce, "You feared me more than you loved me." Daniel's mask cracked, voice harsh. "I feared losing control, losing everything we built." His words twisted, more confession than defense. Robert sneered, "You are unfit to be called a groom." Olivia whispered to her neighbor, "She is stronger without him," though her eyes glistened. Eric shrank back, shame carving lines into his face. Mark closed the paper with deliberate weight. "This marriage cannot proceed on deceit," he declared. The hall gasped, some clutching pearls, others muttering. Grace felt the sound wash over her like a tide. Instead of drowning, she felt herself breathing, truly breathing, for the first time. The crowd vibrated with restless energy, tension thick enough to choke. Robert slammed his hand on the chair. "End this farce now," he commanded. Mark raised his palm, voice clear. "She decides, not you." Grace turned to her father, her voice sharpened steel. "I will not be your pawn any longer." Robert froze, silenced by her defiance. Olivia clapped softly, whispering, "Finally, she's free." Daniel clenched his fists, voice breaking with anger. "You don't understand. I protected us from collapse, from them." Grace's eyes locked on his. "No, you protected yourself. You caged me." Eric muttered under his breath, "She deserves freedom, not contracts." Guests leaned forward, caught between scandal and awe. Grace's chin lifted, veil shimmering under light. Betrayal had shattered the day, but truth had made her unbreakable. She wasn't a broken bride. She was a woman writing her own vows. Grace's voice broke open, raw yet radiant. "I will not marry a man who scripts my silence," she declared. The hall gasped, words echoing against marble and glass. Daniel's face contorted, rage and fear colliding. Robert stood paralyzed, his authority crumbling in public view. Wah. Olivia whispered, tears streaming, "She chose herself." Mark's tone softened, yet carried weight. "Then today will mean something real." Eric lowered his gaze, whispering, "Forgive me," though he knew forgiveness would not come. Guests leaned forward, some in shock, others nodding in respect. Grace drew a steady breath, shoulders straight, veil shimmering like fire. For the first time in her life, her voice was hers alone. The chains of her father's control, Daniel's betrayal, and the burden of silence lay shattered at her feet. This was no longer their story, it was hers alone to tell. The hall quivered with silence as Mark held the document against his chest. His voice rang steady, "This ceremony cannot proceed without truth." Grace's breath caught, her chest tight, as Daniel finally reached for her hand. She pulled back, veil trembling like a flag in the storm. "No more," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. Robert's face burned crimson, torn between shame and rage. "You will not disgrace this family," he barked. Grace turned her gaze on him, sharp and unyielding. "I am not your property," she answered. Olivia murmured, "She's breaking chains." Guests leaned forward, captivated by the fracture in the ritual. For Grace, every moment felt like a step toward a door that would lock behind her once closed. She could either step into her own freedom or seal herself into a prison carved of expectation and betrayal. Daniel's voice cracked as he reached again, desperation painting his features. "Grace, we can still do this. Ignore them all." His hand hovered in air, pleading. Grace's heart squeezed, but anger steadied her. "Ignore betrayal? Ignore truth?" she asked, voice sharp. Robert slammed his fist on the chair. "Sign, and end this disgrace." Olivia's voice rose against him. "She owes nothing to liars." Mark stood taller, voice commanding. "Every vow must be chosen freely. Without that, it is no vow at all." Daniel's shoulders slumped, his mask peeling away, revealing fear and emptiness. Grace's eyes softened for only a moment, grief brushing her chest, but strength returned. "I cannot promise myself to chains," she said. Gasps erupted. The hall shifted, every witness realizing they stood at the precipice of a choice that would redefine everything. The officiant set the document on the altar, hands steady. "Decide now, Grace," he said. The weight of his words pressed against the silence. Grace's heart pounded like a drum, echoing in her ears. Daniel's eyes burned with desperation. "I can change, I can fix this," he begged. Grace shook her head slowly, veil shimmering. "You chose control over love, and I cannot walk into a vow built on fear." Olivia clasped her hands together, whispering, "She's free." Robert tried to rise again, but his legs trembled. "You cannot end it here," he hissed. Grace turned, voice unwavering. "I just did." Guests gasped, the sharp intake of dozens of breaths filling the air. The ceremony, once polished and perfect, was unraveling not in shame, but in truth. Grace felt her spine lengthen, her resolve harden. The choice was hers, and she had already made it. Grace reached for the ring on her finger, twisting it slowly. The hall hushed, breath locked in every chest. She lifted it free, the diamond catching light like a final spark. Daniel whispered, "Broken. Don't do this." She met his eyes, her voice firm. "I return the ring, but I keep my name." Robert sagged back into his chair, powerless for the first time. Olivia's tears streaked down her face as she whispered, "She chose dignity." Mark bowed his head, a solemn acknowledgement of her choice. Eric muttered, "It's done," his shame written plain. The guests erupted, some shocked, some relieved, some clapping softly. Grace stood taller, holding the ring steady before placing it firmly on the altar. The weight that had bound her for years lifted, replaced by fire. Her choice had been carved into the heart of the day. The altar no longer felt like a trap, but a battlefield Grace had conquered. Her chest lifted, voice carrying across the stunned hall. "This day will not break me, it will define me." Daniel collapsed into silence, his last defense gone. Robert turned away, unable to watch. Olivia stepped forward slightly, as though to shield her. Mark spoke softly, "Then let the truth be your witness." Eric's head hung low, his role in the sabotage burned into the air. The guests rose to their feet, some in applause, others murmuring in awe. Grace stood alone at the altar, not as a bride abandoned, but as a woman who chose herself over spectacle. The battle of vows had ended, not in contract or chains, but in fire and freedom. Her choice sealed the outcome forever, no turning back, no mask left. The altar no longer carried the weight of vows, but the wreckage of power stripped bare. Grace stepped back, her breath steady though her heart ached. Robert slumped into his chair, the authority that once filled the room gone like smoke. Daniel stared at the floor, fists unclenched, broken not by love lost, but by control slipping through his hands. Olivia touched her necklace, whispering prayers of relief. Mark closed the ceremonial book, his expression solemn yet approving. Eric shifted, his guilt carved into silence. The guests began to stir, no longer spectators of a grand wedding, but witnesses of a truth unmasked. Grace whispered under her breath, "I walked through fire, and I did not burn." The quiet carried further than any vow could, resonating like a promise fulfilled to herself. Grace moved down the aisle, her steps slow but deliberate. The murmurs of guests swelled, some gasping, others whispering admiration. Olivia leaned forward, eyes shining with pride. Robert kept his head low, unwilling to face the truth he could not silence. Daniel raised his eyes for one last plea, but Grace did not turn back. Mark's voice carried after her, "Freedom is the vow you chose today." Eric wiped his forehead, shame heavier than debt. Grace felt each step like the shedding of chains. The air seemed brighter, lighter, as though the hall itself exhaled with her. For years she had been cast as difficult, unyielding. Now the truth was plain. She was not bridezilla, she was survivor. The applause began quietly, a few hands striking together, then swelling into something undeniable. Outside the hall, the sun cut through clouds, scattering gold across the stone steps. Grace inhaled deeply, the first breath of a woman untethered. Olivia rushed to her side, pressing her hand against Gracie's arm. "You chose truth," she whispered, tears spilling freely. Grace nodded, her own eyes burning but steady. Robert appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching but his voice hollow. "You'll regret this," he muttered, though it carried no power. Daniel lingered behind him, face pale, a ghost of promises undone. Eric slipped away quietly, disappearing into the street. Mark emerged last, pausing to nod respectfully before retreating. Grace lifted her face to the sun, whispering, "I regret nothing." The air was alive with possibility, a new rhythm beating in her chest. Grace removed her veil, letting it fall into Olivia's hands. The fabric no longer felt like armor, but like the last weight lifted. "This was never about a wedding," she said softly. "It was about my voice." Olivia squeezed her hand, whispering, "And you kept it." Robert turned away, shoulders sagging, for once stripped of command. Daniel pressed his hands into his face, broken whispers too low to hear. Eric vanished into the crowd, leaving only questions and regret. Mark closed the hall doors, sealing the chapter behind her. The crowd dispersed, some silent, others murmuring about courage and scandal. Grace felt lighter than she ever had, her gown heavy but her spirit free. She whispered, "I choose myself," and the words felt like vows truer than any ring. As twilight stretched across the horizon, Grace stood at the edge of the garden behind the hall. The laughter of distant guests faded into whispers of wind through roses. She traced the petals gently, remembering the years she had given away to silence. Olivia approached quietly, her voice gentle. "You ended it on your terms." Grace smiled faintly. "Yes, and that is everything." Robert remained inside, swallowing his pride alone. Daniel left without a word, his shadow swallowed by dusk. Eric would live with his choices, but they no longer bound her. Mark's words lingered, "Freedom is vow." Grace lifted her chin, eyes catching the first stars. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I begin again." The day had not given her the marriage she planned, but it had given her back herself, and that was victory enough. The garden was hushed, twilight painting silver across the roses. Grace stood alone, her gown heavy but her heart lightened. She whispered, "They wanted a perfect wedding. I wanted a real marriage." Olivia approached softly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "And you chose truth." Grace's eyes shimmered, not with tears of regret, but with clarity. Robert's shadow lingered at the doorway, but he could not command her anymore. Daniel was gone, his absence louder than any vow. Eric had vanished into the night, carrying guilt with him. Mark's words lingered in her mind, steady as a bell. "Freedom is vow." Grace exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of silence. The night air carried her truth outward, and it became unshakable. The guests slowly exited the hall, voices hushed, carrying fragments of scandal and admiration. Some whispered, "She ruined it," while others said, "She saved herself." Olivia caught the sound, her jaw tightening. Grace walked past them, her chin lifted. She no longer cared for polished appearances or curated stories. Robert muttered to an ally, "History will forget this disgrace." Grace turned, her voice firm, "History remembers the truth." Silence spread, the words cutting cleaner than any vow could. The crowd parted as she walked by, her step soft yet defiant. Even in whispers, she had claimed control of the narrative. They could spin tales, but the truth would endure. At the edge of the street, Daniel waited, tuxedo disheveled, desperation etched into his face. "Grace, please," he begged. His voice cracked, hollow, stripped of authority. Grace paused, the streetlight hallowing her like a shield. "You didn't lose me tonight," she said. "You lost me long before." Daniel reached out, trembling, but she stepped back. "Love without trust is a cage," she continued. He broke, shoulders collapsing, eyes brimming. Olivia moved closer, her protective presence unshaken. Grace's heart ached, but there was no room left for pity. She turned away, each step sealing the distance. The silence that followed was not cruel, it was final. Back at the hall's garden, Robert faced the guests still lingering. His words were clipped. This day will not define us. Yet even he knew it already had. Olivia whispered, it defined her. Grace reappeared briefly, holding the veil she had abandoned. She placed it gently into Olivia's arms. Keep this, she said, as proof I chose truth. Robert turned away, avoiding her gaze. Eric appeared for a moment, lingering at the edge of the crowd, his eyes heavy with guilt. Grace met his stare, then said simply, your silence nearly broke me. But I survived. He lowered his head, vanishing again into the night. The veil no longer meant submission, it had become testimony. Grace stood at the gates of the hall, her gown glowing faintly in the moonlight. She whispered, they wanted perfection, I wanted truth. Olivia clasped her hand, pride shining in her eyes. Robert stayed in shadow, too bound by his pride to step forward. Daniel was gone, swallowed by his choices. Eric disappeared into silence. Mark's voice still echoed, calm and steady, freedom is vow. Grace lifted her chin, eyes fixed on the horizon. She had entered this day as a bride bound by others' demands. She was leaving as a woman unbroken, her dignity intact. The final line etched itself in her heart, a truth that would live longer than rings or vows. They wanted a perfect wedding. She wanted a real marriage.